Can I begin, Mr. Brescia? Thank you, sir. Welcome to the January 22nd work session, Lynbrook Board of Education. If we could all please rise for the pledge of the flag. Mr. Paleshi. Roll call, all are present. We did just have a meeting with the Joint Council of PTAs, very productive meeting. Always grateful to have that time with them to hear their insights and to share thoughts back and forth. We have two presentations tonight. Dr. Balekas will outline the program updates, and Susan Mann, Director of Special Services, will discuss special education services. But first, I will turn it over to Dr. Lynch to discuss the fiscal outlook.
Thank you, Mr. Belmont. So welcome to the January 22nd work session of the Board of Education. So just to understand what the purpose of tonight is on March the 3rd, Mr. Press will be presenting the 25-26 budget. But before we get to the point of talking about the dollars and cents, this is the night that we talk about what we see as the programmatic outcome of next year. What will be the priorities when it comes to curriculum and instruction, and what things the budget will be supporting. So the two things tonight, Dr. Balekas will be talking about some changes to the academic program, and Mrs. Sabin will be talking about the continuum of education services. But before we get to that, those of you who have been following these board meetings and really have been following the last 4 years of board meetings, know that we've been talking about something called the fiscal cliff. The reason we've been talking about a fiscal cliff is because when we came out of COVID, besides the federal money that was given to us, state aid had reached astronomical proportions because they basically owed us a lot of money for the last 10 years, and they made us whole for the last 2 years before last year. So that was a huge influx of money. And we did programmatic things with that money. And what eventually happens, and to take you back to the September 25th meeting, Mr. Press presented an increase in costs in social and emotional and mental health services, an increase in special education, an increase in security, and an increase in transportation. So all of that remains true. And we come to this point where now we have to talk about what the programmatic priorities are for next year. So I think the board was very clear a few months ago that the programmatic priority is the implementation of the profile of the owl. So this community had an exhaustive process where we reached out and determined what was the most important things. What do we want the Lynbrook graduate to know, be able to do, and be like? And we heard on that screen what those things are. This programmatic changes are going to reflect that. They are going to be the profile of the owl in action. At the same time, we know that at that same September 25th meeting, Dr. Balekas had reported on the changes from the Blue Ribbon Commission, which were going to be changes in graduation requirements. So our job is to kind of make the profile of the owl and that Blue Ribbon Commission become one reality. That is what we're going to do. On the other hand, you have also heard us talk about this impending fiscal cliff. So to talk about some of the things that were, I can even say good news, that came out of Albany yesterday. So we were very worried about how this Rockefeller report, how the changes to foundation aid were going to be received. So the governor's budget does include a significant increase in foundation aid for this district. That is because something that I had talked about and all of us had been talking to our legislators about came true. The low-hanging fruit coming out of the Rockefeller report, something that could be relatively easy to implement, was they were using poverty data from the year 2000 to fund this district. For those of you that were here in the year 2000, you know that poverty in this district is not even close to where it was in the year 2000. So they adopted a new poverty metric that actually kind of rights that ship. and they're now using a 3-year average of our actual economically disadvantaged children for the last 3 years. Surprise, surprise, that equals $1 million more in aid. And that's the good news, because that actually is kind of accounting for that. There are some other things I wish they had addressed. We thank them for whatever income we can get, and that certainly goes a long way. I have to say that gave us a sigh of relief when we saw some of those numbers, and chances are if we keep pressing our legislators, maybe even more money will be added to that foundation aid. But let's talk about some of the other things that they have not addressed that are really driving the costs of this district. So I am proud to say for the last, 10 years, but more specifically the last 5 years, we have invested heavily in having Lynbrook students educated in Lynbrook schools. We want all students to be educated in a Lynbrook school. And therefore, we created programs that accommodate the least restrictive environment for those children. So we now have established new small classes so that we do not need children to go to outside placements, but that we can keep them home. And we're very proud of those programs, but at the same time, those are very expensive programs because they involve a lot of adults in the room because it's the right thing to do for children. So what I wish would have been in the state aid formula is a better benefit to reward districts for doing the right things by children. We ran some numbers yesterday, and just to let you know, where does state aid begin for those programs? We must spend $70,000 of your money before the state even starts to aid us on kids that we're keeping in the district. $70,000 is a lot of money on a particular kid. So that we only get, so let's say there's a teacher in the room, a couple of aides in the room, and a behaviorist in the room. We divide that by the number of kids, and each of those kids has to be worth more than $70,000. Let's say they get to $80,000. We're only aided on that $10,000. That's got to change. That is not a good way to reward districts for doing the right thing. The exact counter argument is made when we looked, and I'm not saying we're doing this, this was an academic exercise. Gee, if we sent them to a private placement, if we put them on a bus and transported them to a private school, what would our aid amount be? We then get aided on everything over and above $23,000. Does that seem backwards to you? So a district that has invested, and you'll look at the numbers that Mr. Press put on that screen back in September, a district that invested in these programs, anyone who has seen me in those classrooms know I love these children to death. Those that are doing the right thing by these children are economically punished for keeping them home rather than for outsourcing those kids. That's one thing we need to change, and I think I could just see by people's faces that that kind of makes sense to you. Another thing that is not even anywhere present, we will be the first to admit to you, we used some of those excess funds to start a security force. None existed, and now we have retired law enforcement guarding your children. Nowhere in the funding formula is that expense matched. In an era when protecting children becomes the most important thing in the world, and we're doing it, why is there not commensurate aid to keep up with that? I asked that question to the state, and I would encourage you to ask that question to the state. We are also proud of every dollar we have invested in the social emotional learning and the mental health of your children. We have the best per pupil ratio to social worker and psychologist and guidance counselor in Nassau County. That is the right thing to do for your children. We are not properly funded even a dime for any of that. So you tell me, where are the state of New York's priorities? Thank you very much for the extra $1 million. I thank you very much for that $1 million. I'm never going to look a gift horse in the mouth. But what is being failed to be understood at at the level of Albany is we're not schools anymore. We are full service student servicing and family servicing organizations. Nowhere are children able to be touched in a meaningful way better than in a school. We have launched a Northwell program, and we now know the data that is something that we've invested in, and we don't know any names, but we know that 60%, we do not know about 60% of the cases that are being seen over at Northwell because you're choosing not to put us into the loop. And that's your family's business. We don't want to know if that's a decision you're making. Again, could we be more proud of that? But these are the things that are driving the budget. These are the things that are starting to just get a little tight. In addition to that, and it's just a fact that we're going to have to report when it comes time to the budget, we have seen a historic increase in our transportation budget. So what had happened is we have not had to run a bid for transportation since 2011 because there's a vagary in the law that says as long as the incumbent transportation company is willing to do it at the cost of inflation, go ahead and renew. What we heard from our transportation provider is doing that for the last over 10 years had now put them in an economic state where they had to rebid the contract. And when we rebid that contract, we saw a 68% increase in our transportation costs. That now has to hit this budget. So that sounds like a lot of bad news, but there's some good news in it. Because while we are pursuing the profile of the OWL, and while we are going to do some changes to the curriculum, they can actually coincide and do two things at once. We have to continue to move forward because your children deserve that. We will continue to move forward because your children deserve that. I will be brutally honest, and there's a lot of administrators in this room right now. We went back to them what idiot has administrative meetings at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday? Could you imagine getting that phone call? He wants to see all of you at 3 o'clock on Friday. Gee, thanks, Paul. That's a great one. Why? Because we need them to take a hard look at their budgets to see, and yes, they're always good at saying, okay, yeah, we can give this back, but we needed them to take really hard looks at say, you know what, how can we really tighten that belt so that we can continue to do the good things that I just talked about? And I'm happy to say that they have been stellar with giving some of those, tightening the belt. There may be other things that we will be presenting to tighten that belt. The key is, and I just love the way we just said it to the PTA, we are going to be cutting away from the classroom and away from programs in as much as possible so that we can preserve the core of what this district has always been about. So the good news is you have a really wonderful administrative staff. We have been talking to our teachers union, and they have been very cooperative in helping us brainstorm ways to make this a reality. So cooperatively, we're trying to bring that gap and close that gap. I must be brutally honest, on the 22nd of January, right now, it's not completely closed. However, Mr. Press, you got a couple more weeks to work on this, and we hope that by the time we will be presenting you a balanced budget on March the 5th, but please recognize that there may be some things that you see that may be uncomfortable and not the way we've done things. But remember, it's about preserving the great programs that we have if you have to see any of that stuff. I hope that we don't have to, we really do think that it can come off without much disruption, and that is our goal. But that kind of, I just wanted to set that expectation and kind of manage expectations. So we were just with PTA, and I told them that we would have very explicit marching orders for what to speak to our legislators about. I will be drafting everything I just said into a message that you can all message out to our legislators. I'm very happy to say that our Assemblywoman and our state senator have been in Lynbrook schools. And they have seen, and Mrs. Aragona, you said it inside, and I will. What was the impression that you got from the legislators?
I think they got a great impression, and I was saying inside when we met with PTA, I've been out of the elementary school for 5 years, and the elementary school in that 5 years looks so different than when my kids went. And I think I think they took everything in, and I think they really appreciated it coming here. And I think it was effective, I hope.
And then at least they'll have that picture in their head. And then as I tell them, I may have a fire hose that gets pointed, and it's you. That's what, Mr. Belmont will talk about this all the time. We get what we deserve for being apathetic. And so, if we have to take to the, and it may not be, thank God you've given us reserves for the last 30 years. You've given us some buffer that we can use. If we keep chipping away, let's hopefully move it so that over a multi-year process, we can come out leaner, meaner, and concentrating on, once again, the profile of the owl, what you told us you want from our instructional program. Not to put too much pressure on Dr. Balekis, but he's going to now talk a little bit about the programmatic changes.
Before Dr. Balekis goes on.
I have one quick question. When do the final runs come out?
Great question. So we saw the executive budget run yesterday. The final runs should come out on or about April 1st. So they are constitutionally obliged to pass a budget by April 1st. They don't always do it.
I mean, constitutionally obliged is kind of laughable, because I don't remember the last time they came out on time with those numbers, and there's no consequence to Albany if those numbers don't come out. But we are obligated to put a budget in front of the community on May 18, 20, whatever it is this year. And when we don't know how much we're getting from the state, it's a shot in the dark. And it's been a shot in the dark a number of times over the past few years. And that's just another way we're behind the 8 ball.
Yeah. And to that point, thank you, Mr. Murray, for bringing that up. We traditionally, Lynbrook has always been adopt the budget at the March meeting. That's what we've always done. When Dr. Burek taught me how to be a business official, it's like, we adopt in March. We're not adopting in March. If we don't see something coming out of Albany, I just think it would be hard. A shot in the dark is an excellent way to put it. We'll be adopting at the April meeting, just so we can, again, set expectations when it comes to that.
I just feel like it could change. I'm being hopeful, hopefully not naive, but it's an election coming, and hopefully they'll send more money this way.
I'm not hopeful. And to play on further to what Dr. Lynch was saying, it's important to understand he only gave a few examples of the unfunded mandates that Albany has on us. So when we invite legislators to walk around our schools and they go down the hallways, they go, oh, I didn't know that, oh, that's interesting. The difference is it's not just a question of going back and asking for money. The ruling party in Albany has their own agenda of legislative interests that they have. So it's not enough to just say what we're not getting. You have to go back and look at what the state budget contains and the programs they're funding that many people find are not practical or useful, and they cut away from what we're doing for our kids. And the quickest example of it, without belaboring this, because I will and I do, but I'll just give you one example. You saw in the news today that, one, she made the decision that schools should not allow phones in the classroom. Another example of not having local control. What does Albany know about what Lynbrook is doing, what Hewitt's doing, what Roslyn's doing? What do they know what Buffalo's doing? Why are they making that decision? And she's dedicated, at this point, $13 million to implementing a plan so that schools will keep phones out of the classroom. Think of where that $13 million could go when you're going to hear now what we're being cut from and things that we need programs for. So just one example of it. But you have to look at the state budget, look at what they're spending money on, and realize what they're not giving to the schools. Dr. Balekis?
Thank you, Mr. Belmont. So I'm going to shift gears here to some more positive things, thankfully. So we're going to be talking about some changes that are happening first at the state level, then we're going to work into what that means in Lynbrook. So that idea of the profile of the owl actually is something that's happening in Albany currently. They're a little bit behind us. They're working on something called the Portrait of the Graduate. So same concept, what do we think a student in New York State should look like upon graduation? And they're talking about, instead of course requirements and seat time, they're talking more about standards and meeting certain proficiencies. So what's happening up in Albany right now is they're debating a timeline. There is a timeline up on the State Department website. If you go, the commission at the state level was called the Blue Ribbon Commission. You can Google search this. It's all readily available. And their facts page is this chart. This chart has some shocking things on there for people that haven't been keeping up in the news. So what you're looking at, because this is very different than anything we would ever say in Lynbrook, when we talk about the kids in the cohort of 2025, most of us in this room would think of our Lynbrook High School who is graduating this year. When the State Department talks about the cohort of 2025, they're talking about our current 8th graders. Why? Because they will be entering high school in the year 2025. So everything that's here is all based on State Department dates. So one of the first things you'll see here, they are making changes. They tried to make the high school diploma more accessible to children. So they are working in a progression to remove the Regents exam requirement. So the cohort of 2024, it says up there, will have to sit for the Regents exams, but they do not have to pass them anymore. Where are those kids now? Well, based on what I just said, they are our freshmen. So our freshmen have to, at the moment, according to what was published, and this is all, again, at the moment, and not voted upon by the Board of Regents, but is published by the State Department on its website, that the freshmen will no longer have to pass Regents exams, just sit for them. And they will graduate with something called a New York State High School diploma. What that means, the current sophomores, juniors, and seniors, they have different flavors of diplomas available from the state. So there's a local diploma, there's a Regents diploma, there's a Regents diploma with advanced distinction. Those will all be replaced by a New York State High School diploma. The New York State High School diploma, obviously for us, will still say Lynbrook High School on it. Nobody has to worry. You'll still get a Lynbrook High School diploma, but there will be no distinctions between the diplomas. What will be the distinctions is that there will be seals on the diplomas. And depending on what kind of work you do outside of or in addition to your diploma work, you will be able to earn these seals. The assessments will be fully phased out from the requirements for graduation for that cohort that starts high school in 2027. Those are some of the highlights of what you're seeing here. But what we are finding, though, is that the state is starting to open up what they're talking about for graduation. So what does that mean for us? We need to do the same thing. Look, if the state's finally going to be flexible with something, I think, it's imperative that we do the same thing. So if we look at our student over there with all the question marks over their head trying to figure out what to do with their life, one of the things that the state has been talking about with the standards-based approach is giving the kids options, letting them take electives, and letting them earn, like I said before, different types of seals and credentials in areas that they are interested in. So all of the things that we're going to be talking about in a little bit, we might be talking about things that have been in Lynbrook for a very long time that may have been restrictive, that didn't let kids have these type of choices and options. We're going to be talking about trying to open up some more choices and options for our students. So one of the first new offering types that we're talking about, and again, we can build different options into courses that exist, or we can bring in new courses. So new at Lynbrook High School, we are going to be introducing things called Coursera. Coursera is a company that's been very involved in the collegiate and beyond world, giving people credentials that can allow them to get jobs elsewhere. They also offer college courses through different universities, such as the ones that are on the screen right now. And what kids can earn, when you take a course with Coursera, you can become a Google Tech Level 1 and then Google Tech Level 2 and such. And what these things do are allowing kids to get jobs. And when they come out of school, they can come out with credentials that can earn them, a promotion before they even start in certain companies, which is a pretty cool opportunity. These type of Coursera courses also, too, just so people know, are being offered at the university level. They are also talking about micro-credentialing and giving kids these workforce-ready additional certificates. The other piece in here that we see is AP Seminar. AP Seminar is the first of 2 AP capstone courses. Anyone who has a high schooler may have been hearing about this early January. There's been some literature passed around here. So what were we looking to do here? Our first year, we're getting our toe in the water. This is going to be our pilot year. We are offering this as an English elective. what the seminar course and the subsequent AP research course that come as a partnership do. If you take both of them, you can get a AP capstone diploma. In order to earn that diploma, you have to take 4 other Regents exams, and the AP exams, and you have to have a score of 3 or better on the capstones and an average of 3 or better on the other 4 assessments. So what do we see with the seminar course? They actually have it built around the acronym QUEST. So this is, again, a research-based course, so they're talking about questioning and exploring, understanding and analyzing, evaluating multiple perspectives, synthesizing ideas, team, transform, and transmit. So those are their concepts. What are we hearing? This is not curriculum-based. This is research-based. So kids are exploring interest areas and having an opportunity to dig deeper into something. We are teaching this as a humanities type of complement to what we're doing in the science research program at the moment. I know that Mr. Sorosi has shared with the high school eventually, this may become the AP Humanities class, and there might be an AP seminar for the science research kids as well. We're not there yet, but that was put out there as part of our possible future vision. So just to throw that out there, this is a good start. Other things that are happening. Well, the State Department is saying that everybody is graduating with the diploma based on meeting certain standards. One of the things that was said, though, is you're not allowed to add other requirements to that diploma. So if you meet these standards, that means that courses like the writing lab don't belong in the high school. I know this is something we've been discussing for a while, and this will be a very good move to the middle school for our kids because it allows them to bolster their foundational skills before they see high school. It's important that kids read and write well from the get-go going into high school. How are we going to do this? Right now in 8th grade, we have 2 classes that are married to each other. So we have English and math that are both a period and a half. We will reduce the math classes to 1 period, and we will replace that math class with an English class that will bring in the writing lab. So English would be a period and a half, opposite science for a period and a half. And the other benefit of this is that if we do it in the 8th grade, we could have the same teacher teaching both, which would add better continuity to the course itself. The math, the original reason we had put in the period and a half was that years ago, the Common Core came in and there was a very hefty curriculum that was jumped. So when the state dropped it in, there was about a year and a half to 2 years of curriculum that those 8th graders had missed. We have long taken care of that. So it is about time to make that move on the math and use it for a better purpose. We do see that logo up there for the Writing Revolution. We have been partnering with the Writing Revolution, who does reading and writing across the curriculum. We do think that is something that is going to help bolster not only our middle school program, but across K through 12. We have teachers that are being trained currently on all different grade levels that are going to be implementing notions here. And again, this is that idea that literacy is pervasive and kids need to read and write all over in every subject area. Other things that are going on, back to what I said before, we need to be flexible so that kids can take more electives and courses and pursue their passion areas. So one of the things that's been going on in the high school, we have something called a PAYS Lab. It's been a career exploration opportunity for students. The students entering the PAYS Lab were put in specific course sections to reach that laboratory. That is a period on their schedule. Instead of having it as a standalone class, we are going to work those opportunities into areas such as resource room and small classes where classes can visit and do some career exploration, but it will not take an additional period out of a student's day, which means that students will have more accessibility to electives. Other changes along the same lines, any kid that's put in an inclusion class in Lynbrook in the middle school and high school has had a learning lab attached in some way. So at the middle school, that's all of our inclusion classes. In the high school, that would have been the English and social studies classes. And the learning lab technically was a general education service that was mandated for anybody in the ICT. It was taught by a special educator with special education students. And that wasn't necessarily the most inclusive environment. So what we're going to do with the learning labs, we're going to replace them with humanities and STEM labs. So if kids need extra support in their subject areas, they will still be able to get that. They will be able to get that alongside their general education peers who also need similar supports. So it will be delivered in a more inclusive environment. And you only get what you need, as opposed to everybody in inclusion having to sit for both sides of that lab and take a half period out of their schedule for humanities and STEM. They will take the humanities if they need humanities. They will take the STEM if they need STEM. If they need both, they can take both. If they don't need either, they can have an extra period, again, to take some of the electives and courses that they may have been excluded from in the past. So in the middle school, many kids, unfortunately, when they have support services, lose things like art and tech and such that they may have really thrived in. This will allow them to have those type of classes. In the high school, you will have the humanities labs, and the algebra labs will still be there for the kids that need math support and such. So those will be opportunities, again, to give kids that need support. The last part here, if anybody has been coming to the board meetings for the last year or two, we've been doing a lot of talking about reading. And my friend Scarborough's rope is up there, which talks about the big ideas of reading. And realistically, when you get down to reading, there's two concepts that you need to know: how to take words off the page and to make meaning of them once you do so. So we're going to be talking about reading in two different flavors called phonics and comprehension. So phonics, taking the words off the page; comprehension, understanding them. And what we're going to do here, right now we have a lot of different programs going on throughout the day. And depending on when your program is, it may be more or less disruptive to what you can take elsewhere. So we're going to streamline the secondary reading classes so that those that need phonics will be put in the same periods, which again will open up some elective opportunities for them, and they will learn, how to read the words off of the page. Then that would happen in traditional reading settings. The comprehension, on the other hand, like I said, that's something you do all day long. That's something that's built into your curriculum. So for general education students, that could be part of what's worked on in the humanities lab. And for special education students that don't have other services, again, that would be a good place to work on comprehension. If you're in a small class or a resource room, we can work on comprehension in those environments. And again, not pull you out from something else. And I think the biggest thing that we're talking about today is trying to give kids real opportunities to explore and access the great electives that we have currently, and some of these great electives that I think we're going to be building over the next few years in response to what's happening both with our own portrait of the owl and the profile of the owl and the portrait of the graduate from the state. So those are things that are coming down the pipeline. Questions from the board, please.
I have a question. I think it was the second slide, the diploma requirements. So the cohort 2024 is our current freshmen.
That are current freshmen, correct. They started school in 2024.
So is this happening this year, like this June?
No, well, these are when these kids graduate. So this has not been voted on by the State Department yet. But what the
Okay.
state is saying at the moment, they propose to the Board of Regents, who has to, same way that you're a Board of Education and you ratify things, they need the Board of Regents to ratify. But if the Board of Regents ratifies their plan, the current freshmen, when they graduate high school, as long as they sat for the Regents exams, we can give them a diploma for passing all their coursework, which is a big change. Traditionally in Lynbrook, you had basically two report cards going on at the same time. You had, these are the assessment requirements, and I took an English exam and I passed it, a math exam, a science exam, and 2 social studies exams, as well as taking the coursework and obtaining my credits. If this goes through, what will happen is it will just be credits based. As long as you sat for the test, you do not need to pass them anymore, which is a big change.
So they'll take the test this year,
Correct.
unknowing.
Not knowing
not
if this is
knowing,
going to
is this
affect
going
you.
to matter, or is this not going to matter?
Correct.
Got it.
When are they supposed to vote on this? Because they have a lot of dates of endgame, but it doesn't seem like they've really shown us much of the rollout, and it doesn't seem like it's realistically actually going to happen at this timeline.
Yeah, see, and that's the problem right now. It could happen in any timeline because they could make this change, 2 years from now and still affect that freshman class. What the state's agenda is there, I don't really know what the timeline is. I think we're all hopeful it's going to be sooner rather than later. They have been saying it's going to be sooner rather than later, but until things become, 100% solid, it's hard to say exactly what they're doing. This is their current model, and there's a little disclaimer at the bottom of the page, basically, that says this has not been voted and ratified yet by the Board of Regents. So we will see. I do know that this stuff is something that's on their agenda. It seems like every month. What vote they're going to take at what point, I don't know.
Dr. Blackus, for cohorts 27, 28, cohorts 29, nothing is mentioned about Regents exams at all. So do we have any indication of where the state's going with that? Has there been any chatter about that? Does this leave the door open for possibly eliminating Regents exams?
Well, it doesn't sound like the Regents exams will ever be eliminated. That's what we're hearing. So the Regents exams would be a pathway or a choice to demonstrate proficiency of standards. And I think there are many students that would like to demonstrate proficiency in that way. So for many kids, that might be still their pathway. But let's say that you have some students that sitting for an assessment where I have to memorize everything I did all year long, and I have a learning disability where memorization is not necessarily my strong point, but I understand the content, and I can do a really great capstone type project to demonstrate that I know this stuff. That is something that could be another option. And what they're talking about when they made all these changes, they actually did put out in the documentation, and I put that as my first bullet here, that they were looking for ways for certain special education students who have not been able to access a diploma because they weren't necessarily the best test taker to be able to do things in a different way. So that was that was an impetus for why they did this. But it doesn't mean the exams are going away. And I'm going to throw out something else out there just so people understand what happens with the federal government role in all of this. So the federal government for years has been looking at math, English, and science. And if you notice what kind of tests we have in both the elementary and the middle schools, it's those three subject areas. So at the high school, if other Regents exams did fade, those three areas you would assume would be, because of federal statutes, tested at some point. Whether or not, again, the tests count for anybody, that's a different, story.
Thank you for this. It's a lot to take in, but, I'm starting to think, first of all, we've talked about the diploma requirement changes, and I think the flexibility for students is going to be a net positive eventually when we know what the state wants from us. But when we think about Billy's comments about unfunded mandates, and we listen to Dr. Lynch talk about budget pressures that we're facing, do we have any notion at this point of what kinds of budget pressures offering more pathways to graduation are going to have on the district and how we might manage those?
That's a great question. So as I indicated before, we have outstanding elective programs. Some of those electives run very lean as far as children in seats. And if we started to see where the funding does not keep up with that, we could possibly be in a circumstance where we need to cut electives for budgetary reasons or not offer as wide an offering, because are you going to run a class for 6, which we currently can do. So, again, we're not necessarily looking at that in this current budget environment, but you're asking long-term. I think that's a reasonable thought.
Dr. Belekas, if I may, how are you handling the Regents exams at present? For instance, if the Regents exams will no longer be required with this year's freshmen, if this passes, those students are going to sit for whether it be the living environment or the biology Regents, or potentially the algebra or the geometry Regents this year. How are we handling those exams at a local level, given that this is not yet law?
So right now, the way that Lynbrook has changed over the last few years, the assessments benefit children in the sense that if you do well, you can get the point on your average. If you don't do well, it doesn't affect your grades anymore. So right now, we're actually in a good space with the way that assessments are being calculated towards grades. Again, you do have to sit for the exams regardless. So these kids would have to sit for these assessments. The bigger question is going to be, and this is back to what Mrs. Danino asked before, they take the assessments now in June. Whether or not I make them retake the assessments because they have to pass, I would hope that we have information from the state before that happens, because that's when Mrs. Kelly gets very tricky.
No harm, but do no harm only comes into play when you're worried about the overall average for the year for the course.
Right.
It's if you're going to make a student sit to retake the exam because it is a diploma requirement, that's really my question. What are
Yes,
the
I
local
understand
plans
that question, and I'm
for
hoping
that?
we have an answer before then, because I can't imagine that we're the only ones thinking that way.
Dr. Bless, one other thing, on the slide where it says writing lab to middle school, the second bullet is the 1.5 periods of math to the 1.5 periods of English. I'd just like to say, as a math teacher, believe it or not, I think this is a very strong move educationally, because if you know what the New York State curriculum is like, even if we're going away from the Regents exams, if you know what the New York State curriculum is like for algebra, geometry, and trig, they're effectively reading comprehension exams with some math thrown in it, and the Regents exams for social studies and the curriculum for social studies is very similar. So I personally think, as a math teacher, especially once you get to the Algebra 2 level, I mean, you have to look far and wide to actually find arithmetic on that test. It's all reading. So truthfully, I do think, even though it seems like we're decreasing the math, I think we're, going through the back door and helping these kids do better with the higher curriculum. Not even higher. Algebra 1 has a ton of reading as well, which is what they take in 8th grade. So Algebra 1 and Algebra 2 curriculums, whether it's a Regents exam or not, are so heavily based in reading comprehension that I think this is going to help these students mathematically as well.
I agree with you, and also too, just to put it out there, the science assessments. I know we talked about Regents exams are fading, and yes, I see that, Mrs. Kelly, I know this is your area, are being replaced next year for both the earth science and the living environment. Because of those changes, people should anticipate more assessments that look like the grade 5 and the grade 8 assessments, which are very, 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 very difficult reading assessments. They are no longer science tests. They require you to break down scientific vocabulary and speak effectively about it. So yes, all the writing moves here, with all of our 8th graders taking those new science assessments, will benefit them as well. So it's not just on the math side, yes, the scientists in particular. And again, back to that writing revolution idea, we're all teachers of reading and writing within our own disciplines. And I think that's something that, again, will be reinforced by some of those changes at Albany.
Yeah, I mean, and just to jump on the point that Mr. Pulaski made, it's not just in the school level. We're seeing at the college entrance level, there's going to be a return of the standardized tests, right? A number of schools that did away with the SAT, ACT are bringing it back. If you look at how the SAT and ACT are administered, even on the ACT even more so, the math and the science sections are heavily reading comprehension sections. So enforcing the reading writing element is really, at that early age, is really going to pay dividends throughout the high school level, but also even as you get towards the college level, because there is more of a focus on the ability to read and write in every subject matter, not just traditionally English.
Sorry, I'm going to dovetail on that, if I may. On the Learning Lab slide, so where we talked about streamlining secondary reading, I love that the writing lab is coming down, because with writing fluency comes reading fluency very often. But could you speak to the numbers that we're talking about when we talk about secondary reading, middle school and high school? Do we have ideas of how large these classes are, or if they're pull-out services, push-in services? Is it?
Okay, so right now they're all pull-out services, and because we have the services so fragmented, they're all different times a day, and depending on who's receiving what course at a special time, they may or not be missing out on an elective. One of the great things about Lynbrook High School is it's a small district, and we all know each other pretty well. one of the terrible things about Lynbrook High School is it's a small district and a lot of things are offered as singletons. So if you have your class and you're the unlucky one that has reading during the time where your favorite elective is being offered, you do miss out. So what it's going to allow is a lot of classes that may be offered one-on-one and such to be offered in a small group so that the kids are all in the same time period, which means that we can work some of the electives around that time period as opposed to, well, you ended up in this period, that you ended up in that period, and unfortunately, Mr. Brescia had to pick a period to put the class in. And that is something that happens. And yes, I apologize, Mr. Brescia, for calling you out there in the middle of the board meeting.
Thank you, Dr. Blekas.
Thank you.
Now I'd like to call upon Mrs. Saban to do her presentation on the continuum of education services.
And just to clarify for the audience, this is a budget work session, so there are no questions from the audience. The next board meeting on the 12th, they'll take questions.
Evening, everyone. Hi. I'm here to talk a little bit about the continuum of special education services here in Lynbrook. Just before jumping into it, very briefly, this is for special education students. They are classified, and the continuum of services is under Part 200 of the Commissioner's regulation. So very different than electives and choices and all of that. So I just wanted to make a point of that before going into it. So in Part 200, these are the full continuum of services. So we always make an effort to have students seen in the least restrictive environment. So that would be potentially related services, speech, occupational, physical therapy, sometimes counseling. Those are supports to the general education environment. Resource room can be offered only in a group of up to 5 students. So that is for students who require that additional support. Consultant teacher direct is something not used very often. That's a push-in and very individualized service within the general education curriculum. Then integrated co-teaching, there's a special education teacher, a general education teacher, and we can't have more than 50% of the students classified within the total classroom, and that can't exceed a number of 12 students. Here in Lynbrook, we have up to 2 hours, so some students have a little less than 2 hours. It could be up to 2 hours a day that a special education teacher would be pushing into an elementary ICT classroom. And on the secondary level, it's more course by course, depending on student strengths and weaknesses. Special class settings, no general education students in there, all special education students. I'm going to walk us through all of the buildings and where we have different small special class sizes, but that is not integrated at all, separate setting. For students who cannot be educated here in Lynbrook, and we're very proud of the programs that we offer in Lynbrook, but where that can't be possible, we have programs like BOCES, other public school districts, and state-approved non-public schools. For students who can't be included in a classroom setting due to their health or educational needs, they could potentially be educated at home or in a hospital setting. So that's the full continuum. I'm going to walk you through starting at the kindergarten center. So at the kindergarten center, we do have the full continuum. New to Lynbrook this year is that small class of 12, a full day special class. Maximum number of students in that class is 12. And blended, that's a term that we use here in Lynbrook. That just means a foot in each door. So they might be in an ICT setting for some portion of the day and in a special class setting for some portion of the day. Used to be that we had 2 hours in each door. This was set forth, but again, these decisions are made by a committee. Committee on Special Education looks at individual student needs, and they make a decision. So the number of hours that a student is in ICT or in blended can vary based on students' individual needs. Again, where they have a strength, we want them included in the least restrictive environment. And so this blended offers them that opportunity wherever possible. Again, this is the first year that we had a full day program, and those decisions are made based on the cohorts of students that we have coming into the district, the needs of those students. So again, the committee looks at the needs of the students and says, this student's needs are greater than that of the students we traditionally were serving in a blended program. And so we were able to develop that full-day special class in the kindergarten center. Great thing about the kindergarten center, everyone is all in one place, and we're able to offer that full continuum. So again, where a student might have a strength and they can be included in a general education classroom or in an ICT setting, they're not secluded in that small separate class. And again, you know, they get the support that they need there. That's what we want to see happen. We want to see them grow. So again, starting at the kindergarten center, our goal would be the next year they can go off to their home elementary school and be in a less restrictive environment if they've done well. The committee meets again, looks at individual needs of individual students, and we come together as a team and make sure that we have those programs offered.
Ms. Saban, just for parents who are listening and might not have a student in the special ed world, can you just explain that 1211, what those numbers actually
Sure,
mean?
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Maximum of 12 special education students, no general education students in that special class setting. And the one is a special education teacher, and the second one is an additional aide in the classroom to provide additional support and supervision. So now we see that number change a little bit when we're looking at the Marion Street continuum, because we do have a group of students whose needs are even greater than that full-day class of 12. Those students are in a smaller class, maximum of 8 special education students. Their educational needs are much greater. Their language skills, they have a lot more support from our related service personnel in that class, and as you can see, an additional aide. Sometimes, and we heard about, you know, the tour our local officials took, that we have a lot of adults in some of these small classes because sometimes those students' individual plans might warrant additional adult support beyond what is already available in that class. So the thing that I want to point out at Marion Street, traditionally we've been able to offer that continuum. The blended program has been in Marion Street. We have ICT there. And the students in the classes that I have listed here are in the upper grades. So they're starting to age out, and you'll see as I walk through the different buildings, we have started with cohorts. So they start coming out of the kindergarten center and go into an elementary school as a group. So they may not go to their home school if they're in a class of 8. And it can't exceed 8. So when Marion Street had a full group or Waverly had a full group, we couldn't add the next year's kindergartners to that group. We had to start a new cohort in another building. And you'll see when I walk through those other buildings where those started. But these students here at Marion Street are in the upper grades and starting to age out. So these are not younger students. And at Waverly Park, again, the full continuum, related services, resource room, integrated co-teaching. When integrated co-teaching was offered here initially at Lynbrook, it was offered in all buildings and in all grades. But what we did see is that each year we see what the committee recommends. We just heard of you can't enroll a class with just 6 students, so we had one year where there were 0 ICT students recommended by the committee, so that wasn't necessarily run. So again, we're looking at, we can't run a class for just 1 or 2 students. So when we're looking at Waverly Park, we do anticipate a group of students coming into first grade next year requiring that ICT, but we have grades in this building that do not have the ICT class at this time. And again, the full day small special class of 8 is upper grades right now. So 4th and 5th graders who at some point they are going to be aging out. We do not have blended at Waverly. We didn't have enough students for the entire district to offer that in the same way that they had the integrated co-teach. So traditionally, again, that was offered at Marion Street. We know those students are getting a little older and aging out. and then I'm going to talk to you about where our younger cohorts are coming into. At West End, this year, we had a small class of 8 begin. So those are kindergarten youngsters. So that's where that continuum is going to start up from the kindergarten level. And we anticipate next year that our current kindergarten 1211 class will be at West End. So this is not something that we have here now. It's something that we anticipate the committee recommending for a group of students who will require continuation of that full day class of 12, and that'll be at West End for next year. We don't currently really have a blended program because we don't have the 12, but that's something that will be offered going forward because we know, again, the students in the full day special class where they have opportunities to be included in the co-teach is what we traditionally called blended. So again, individual decisions for individual students. They may spend some time of their day in the integrated co-teaching class and some time of their day in the class maximum size of 12 students. And then moving on to our middle schools, we have at North related services, resource room, ICT, and our special class settings there, as the kids are getting a little bit older, that smallest class profile, the students who are in the 8, have been moving up into a class that's now capped at 12. At the secondary, it starts to look a little bit different. 12 students, 1 teacher, 1 aide in that smallest class. And then we also have special class 15. That is something that traditionally was at South. And now with this year's grade 6, we started that cohort here at North. Again, that offers the same opportunity for a blended type of program where students who have an area where they excel can be participating in an integrated co-teaching class, or where they need more support, they could be in that class that is being capped at 15. That in-between 15 class is working on the same curriculum as our ICT students, just in a smaller setting with a special education teacher, providing more support and modifications. And again, at South, we had traditionally had that class of 15. I list it here now because we still have students who have been there. We're not having them transfer to North to participate in that program. And as they age out, we're going to only be offering that at North for all of the students. We may only have a handful of students enrolled in those small classes per grade. And again, we want to make sure it's a functional group. So having just 2 or 3 kids in a small class learning together doesn't feel like a classroom setting.
Can I ask a question? At
Sure.
the middle schools, the 15-1 and the 12-1, are they integrated with the other students for specials and electives?
Yes, they have those opportunities throughout the day. They're in cafeteria with their peers. We have a lot of after-school clubs and owl buddies and a lot of opportunities for integration.
And then back to Waverly, when you said there was no blended, does that mean that those students in that 812 are not ever integrated with their other peers?
They have opportunities for integration where the teachers are collaborating and doing activities together, but they are, for the most part, they're not learning their academic subjects together side by side. So
But-
they do have push-in opportunities.
Like for art or something possibly?
Definitely for specials. And again, individual students. So we've had, these students tend to, by characteristic, maybe excel at math. They may go in and participate for a math lesson. At the beginning of a reading lesson, sometimes there's a whole class lesson where there's a read out loud. They might come in and join for activities like that. So there's integration on those levels, but their instruction is happening predominantly in
class.
the
So
small
that's why
class.
it didn't say blended on that slide,
Right.
because it's
There's
not
no
an
in-between
instruction.
place, right.
Okay, thank you.
And I know it was already mentioned that I just want to repeat again that traditionally the ICT in the middle school and in the high school came with a lab class that was an additional support, and it was required. So we know we've had a lot of requests from those students, from the parents, for more opportunities for electives. We know this particular population of students really require, having a better understanding of what those career opportunities are in the future, and that's a good opportunity to be in electives. So the committee meets. If they need additional supports, we talk about how those needs can be met. But again, in the high school, that's the big change here. And otherwise, again, full continuum here where students have an opportunity by subject. So again, we're not calling it blended because they may be in one type of class for math and another type of class for English. It will depend on where their strengths and weaknesses lie.
Can I ask you another question? Sorry. Are these classes at capacity? And if not, have we considered bringing in other children, students from other districts for tuition?
Not all of these classes are at capacity. Our classes in the elementary school are getting fuller. So when you're looking at a class that only has a maximum of 8 students and it's enrolled at 6, I am sometimes concerned, we'll have a student move in tomorrow over the summer and we may not have room for our own residents. We have, in the past, had students from other local districts participate in those classes when they were under-enrolled. So we had 2 classes enrolled at 4. We were able to welcome in students from other districts. We had the opportunity to collapse those 2 classes together when a couple of students aged out, and it didn't make sense to keep 2 classes open for non-residents. So, so they're not with us right now.
Would it be fair to say, and someone else, Ms. Berman or someone else might have to chime in also, those small classes, or it's 812 classes, I'm kind of doing a little math in my head, but between salary and benefits, they're easily $250,000 a piece or more to run those classes. Is that a fair statement?
And it's additional related service personnel
Without
on
even,
top.
yeah, without
right.
even talking
Yeah,
about that.
absolutely.
So, you're talking $1 million just for that handful of students, and we want to give that to them, don't get me wrong. But, I think that's just something to point out, is that these are high cost needs that we're grappling with here. Now, what would a student with that level of need typically cost to have to send out per student, if there's a typical?
Yeah, I mean, it ranges when you put together all of the costs with transportation, related
Yeah.
services, et cetera. I could use a ballpark of 80, 90, 100,000. It depends on which placement they're in.
Right.
I'm
So
sorry,
it's
go ahead.
actually tremendous savings to have those programs here, but
Right, because that's
yet they're
per
so
student.
expensive.
Right.
Yeah.
And I would imagine, I can't speak to transportation costs to bring them in the neighborhood versus elsewhere, would be reduced as well.
Thank you.
But I also want to put the aid conversation on that one, so that with each of those students at 80 to 100,000, back to my 70,000 number, if, not that we're doing this, if we were to put them in outside district settings, the aid is actually greater that we're getting back from the state, and that just seems
That's just
opposite to me.
unconscionable.
That's just unconscionable.
I know because of the support we've received from the school board and from the community, I don't have to say the value to all of our students of having these particular students as part of our school community. I appreciate that so much. And just the next piece to say to that is that there are waiting lists at BOCES. When we do have a situation where we need to look for placement because we really can't educate the students here, we have students who end up being on home instruction for an interim placement. We don't ever want to see that happen, but it's just important to know that there aren't necessarily options out there if that were to be a decision. And again, I appreciate the support and the knowledge, how much this community values these particular students. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, I didn't want to suggest that I thought we should
No,
look
I-
for other places.
yeah.
I just wanted to like help
There
the
is
community
nowhere.
understand
No room
just
at the end.
how much one student with significant needs can cost, and we have a complete moral, ethical, societal obligation to them that I believe in, but it's not cheap.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's highlighting, Mr. Murray is highlighting a good point, and I'm about as dollars and cents per person as you can have, but these are the kids that are most in need, and I think keeping them wherever possible in-house and meeting their needs locally, where they're not sitting on a bus for 55, 60 minutes to go to an outside placement, where they're not constantly being moved around, that's an area I'm not sure you could even put a price tag on, right? So yes, it is cheaper to do it in-house. That's an added benefit, but I think the real benefit is that we're providing the needs of our most needy students. But it really does highlight what Dr. Lynch is saying. It is insane or unconscionable that the formula penalizes us for doing what's right in terms of aid. We'd get more aid for sending these kids and putting them on a bus for 55 minutes and having them at home while they wait for a BOCES placement to open up than we get for actually doing a better job. I mean, that's crazy to me. I don't know what Albany is thinking.
None of us do. Yeah.
And just another thing that Mrs. Saban just said, the whole Owl Buddies program that has emerged in every one of our things. So if you come, and I encourage everyone to come to the McInerney Awards at the end of the year that SEPTA has, when you see how many kids get an award for working with children with special needs, it is adding a level of compassion and justice and just fun to every kid in this district, and every kid that is involved in Owl's Buddies, it is just such an important aspect of their lives that I don't know what the price tag on that would be. None.
My son had participated in Owl Buddies at North, and I think the general ed students actually get more out of it than the special ed students. Like, they loved it. So you guys are doing a great job.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you, Ms.
Thank you. Do you need this back?
Anything else from the board? All right, thank you for coming out. Our next meeting will be a regular board meeting on February 12th. Stay safe, stay warm.